The, the CARES Act, stimulus bills, unemployment benefits, bailouts for corporate America, additional monies for schools and universities to operate during COVID-19, and executive orders directing agencies to carry out the laws of the land. On State of the Water, I'm your co-host, Dr. Eric Claville. We'll discuss these very important pieces of major legislations recently passed that's changing our world right before us. And to help us understand this very important changing legislation, we have government relations professional, former congressional staffer, Virginia House Delegate Chief of Staff, and NSU alum, Jasper Hendricks. Welcome, Jasper, to the show, State of the Water. How are you today? Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, how's it going?
Wonderful, wonderful. How are things on your end?
Things are going great. It's a little hot. It's a little hot.
I hear you. I think that heat wave is affecting us all, but like always, we'll definitely get through it.
Hey, at least you guys are by the water. So.
Exactly. Speaking of by the water, I gave your introduction. You're a former congressional staffer. You're a former chief of staff for Virginia House Delegate. You worked in the Washington Bureau of the NAACP, former activist, and now government relations professional. But you're also an NSU alum. Tell us in your young career how these entities have changed your life and how NSU has prepared you for this.
Actually, during the time that I was at Norfolk State, we had Dr. Marie McDevitt, and I actually was fortunate enough to work under her in her leadership and watching how she navigated through the Virginia legislature and being able to get the funding for Norfolk State and fight for more funding for Norfolk State and other HBCUs. During that time, I believe, we were up against, we were looking at, how states, especially southern states, had just not been funding HBCUs at a level of other institutions. And so she took that head on, and I actually spent some time in Richmond with her and watching her. And so, and then coming back and then fighting for, our Norfolk State family. And so I've continued that throughout my career, and even in Washington, I've hosted groups from Norfolk State students, at the White House, specifically when President Obama was there. I was on the presidential appointments task force. And so one of my jobs was to review resumes. And so I used that access to be able to host different groups of people that did not have the access that I was fortunate enough to have. I grew up in Farmville, Virginia, but being a part of that Norfolk State family, taught me that. And so I've never forgotten, where I've sort of, come from throughout this and always remember where the fight was. And so especially, with my work with the NAACP as Director of Voter Empowerment, I made a specific focus on HBCUs and creating, voter empowerment programs at HBCUs so that, as African Americans, we need to understand the importance of our vote, and especially during this time, and what we're seeing across the country, and people coming together. I just hope that it continues and people show up at the polling place, in November.
Exactly. And as we've talked about a lot on this show and others, we believe that 2020 is probably one of the most important elections of our lifetime.
No, definitely. I think it is.
Benita, what do you think about that?
I think I agree with Mr. Hendricks. Again, thank you for being here, but I completely agree with you. All the things that we see now, people have got to vote. This is so critical. And so we need to make sure that, the simple things, take your neighbor, make sure somebody has a ride, talk to young people, get out there and do it. I was thinking on myself, I said, this year for this season, I really want to be involved. And I really hadn't thought that as much in years past, but it seems like so much is on the line, so much is on the table this year. And so I completely agree with you. We got to get folks out there.
That's it. Before we get into more of this legislation and this deep discussion with Jasper Hendricks, our government relations professional, political analyst, and an NSU alum, we want to give out that call-in number one more time, 757-823-9110. That's 757-823-9110. Jasper, have you ever seen a time that such as this that we're in your years and working on the Hill, both in Richmond and also in Washington, D.C., where it seems that there's so much confusion and there's really not a lot of agreement on really priorities in legislation.
I mean, you're absolutely right. I've had this conversation. I've been having conversations with people. I actually got out of politics after the last election cycle. I was doing finance on the West Coast in Silicon Valley for the Democratic Party. And after the last election cycle, I just said, okay, I'm gonna switch careers, and I moved to Nashville, and began a private life of making money and trying to anyway, and did association management. Just got away from politics, and as Benita said earlier, I was just like I can't sit on the sideline, anymore. Because there's so much dysfunction. It wasn't like it was before President Obama, and I'm not blaming him in any way. I'm looking at our civil rights organizations and our leadership within our African American organizations. Before the president, before President Obama took office, I was part of a group called the Black Leadership Forum. And that was all the African American organizations got together once a month in D.C. to talk about the things that we were doing. And I represented my organization at the time at that table. And that was like Reverend Jackson, Reverend Sharpton, Mark Moriel, Urban League, the president of NAACP, everyone, all the fraternities and sororities got together once a month in Dr. Dorothy Height's building. This was an organization that was founded by Dr. Dorothy Height and several others back in the day, and it was called the Black Leadership Forum. And that group got together, and we met with Democratic leadership and Republican leadership and had a consolidated legislative effort in a front. We met, regularly each other, but then we met with leadership. And so when we shared a joint legislative packet. Now, when President Obama took over, it was just like we were in inauguration every day for 8 years. And those same leadership, they were enjoying the parties, and you would see them on BET when they would have the live performances. But, they were no longer meeting together, and coming together and talking about a legislative front. And when we had the perfect opportunity, because he opened so many doors, and there were a few people, who were able to see, and some of the things that he was doing, and and the opportunities he was providing for the African American community. But unfortunately, our leadership, they just were in party mode for 8 years. And so now we're at a point where no one, there's no clear leadership. You have people saying defund the police, but we don't mean, get rid of the police completely. But then you got the other side saying, we mean get rid of the police. And so it's just like, there's confusion, there's mixed messaging, and no one is there, and because no one has been at the table for the last, 8 years.
Well, Jasper, you kind of skipped to what we believe, what we wanted to ask you. What do you think progress looks like moving forward? So I want to go to the CARES Act, but I want to get your take on this, because you've just pretty much told us and our audience about the problem in Washington, especially as it relates to civil rights, African American issues. So what if you were given a magic pen, what prescription would you write and what plan would you create in order to solve this void that we have?
We have to focus on safe voter turnout this year. We have to focus on public information campaigns to educate people on safe ways to absentee vote and to vote early, and to encourage everyone to utilize, online voter registration, so that you can make sure that all your friends and family and neighbors are registered to vote no matter what. I met with my congressman's office last week, and he's created a public information campaign, here in Tennessee. That's something that members of Congress can use federal resources for, and to just teach and to educate people how to safely vote, because we are going to be voting in an unprecedented time right now with this pandemic. Super Tuesday this year here in Nashville, we had a tornado, and that took out 3 voting precincts.
Wow.
What if that happens on Election Day this year, in November? So we can't take any chances. So that's one thing we need to focus on. And then, we need to work on making sure that we elect the right people, because, the extension of the CARES Act, would be phenomenal, but we need to start having the conversation on a livable wage, equitable wage. If we were paying people the way that we were supposed to be, then that we would not have needed an extra $600 a week, and we wouldn't have to have this argument in Washington on whether or not, we need to continue this or not.
So, Jasper, I like what you're saying in terms of getting people out to vote in all the different ways. But do you think the pandemic will have an effect on people getting out to vote?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It will, because you're going to have longer lines. We've seen it in some places. Mm-hmm. We watched it in Georgia. We've seen it in Georgia where people were voting until midnight. We've seen it in Louisville, in Kentucky when they had an election, and and secretaries of state have started closing precincts or consolidating precincts and making these mega precincts. And but there is a program, there is an effort that's being led by LeBron James and his group to work with NBA facilities to make those equipped to be able to handle massive turnout for voter turnout. Because, so yes, the virus will, impact this. And that's why I said we're going to have to encourage people to vote early, utilize absentee voting, and other methods to have our voices heard.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jasper, you mentioned earlier that you're currently working on a public information campaign in order to get information out about early voting, online registration in every jurisdiction and state. But what I want to ask you is, what do you think the impact would be on the trust factor or misinformation? How do you think that will play in this election, especially with registration of voting, early voting, and mail-in ballots?
Well, people are going to say that those ways that there could be, some fraud or whatever. But the thing is, one thing about doing things online is that you always leave a footprint. Mm-hmm. And I know that Norfolk State has a cybersecurity program, and maybe that's something that someone can look at and doing some research and getting funding, allocated to the university to look into election protection and how to make sure elections are secure, because we're going to need to know going forward in the future anyway. Regardless, we're not going to be going back to the same way. And so when you look at, election fraud, there's ways to monitor it. So people who register to vote online, you have to have a state-issued ID. You have to have this number. You have to have a number, which means you had to turn in information, and so you are a person, that's in the system. So it's hard to, fill that out for someone else and sign it out. But that means that people have to get a state-issued ID. And guess what? If you want to work, you got to have an ID. So everybody should have an ID.
So what you're saying is very important that we get the information out right now, not to wait till tomorrow, not to wait until the next week, right, but understand what it takes to vote in your jurisdiction.
Right. And in Virginia, there's an election every year.
Right.
So there's a major, so you shouldn't have to recreate the wheel. If someone creates, the program, it should be able to, sustain, because you have a major election every single year.
Awesome. Now, I want to deal with, you mentioned a piece of legislation that really has helped the economy, but some people said it's not enough, and that's the CARES Act. And right now, there's debate in Congress about an extension, another stimulus, but there's factions saying, no, they don't need any more money. Cut the unemployment benefits. Do you think that the CARES Act went far enough, and do you think an extension is needed to the same degree that the CARES Act was created?
I think that the CARES Act did go far enough, but I also believe that an extension is needed, and that is because the federal response to the pandemic was not sufficient in other areas. So you have to blend the two. You have to blend everything together. So you can't have just one thing and think that this is going to solve the problem. So we needed to have mass mandates, or encouraging people more strongly earlier on when this pandemic was identified, and with that CARES Act, we may not be in the situation, but we never know, because this is a virus. Right. And you can't control a virus. Yes, I think that the CARES Act was far enough. It did do enough, but we didn't do enough in other areas. But there has to be another extension.
And I completely understand
because
that.
you failed on the other areas. Now people still can't go back to work safely.
Right, and that's what we're saying. It's almost like we're playing catch up. Okay, now we had it, but so many people needed this, the funding and the money and so forth. And we see, of course, businesses and organizations going out of business. And so it just seems like had we started earlier, as you're mentioning, we wouldn't be playing catch up. And that just seems to be what we're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and having conversations with people here, in the state, I live in Nashville. I don't know if I mentioned it before. Now I'm a resident of Nashville, Tennessee now, and working with our local government and state officials, like you're saying here, they're playing catch up as well. And then we've been identified as one of the 18, hot spots, and today the mayor just announced in Nashville 455 more new cases, and they're saying that it's coming from the bars, and the bar owners want to sue to stay open. So it's just like, what are you doing? Like, what?
Again, leadership on the national level, state level, local level, just confusion, it seems, in every single house that we have. 757-823-9110. 757-823-9110. Call in to engage Jasper Hendrick, government relations professional, political analyst, and NSU alum, as we talk about legislation impacting our lives today. Jasper, you mentioned the CARES Act, and we understand that that's a congressional issue. But what can executive orders play? What role can they play in helping to bridge the gap between this confusion that we have and getting back to normal?
So, but which executive orders? You talking about state executive orders or federal?
Well, both.
Because with the state having control over its, the citizens and operations of the state, is key. And Virginia, you're fortunate enough to have a doctor, as a governor, and so I would trust him, and because I'm pretty sure he's getting information, from infectious disease specialists, that he's worked with for years, and so so I think it's pretty. It boggles my mind how people would be against that, who would be against his thinking, he's taking care of children all his life. But anyway.
Well, look, Jasper, you'll be surprised. In Georgia, we've got the governor of Georgia suing the mayor of Atlanta over wearing masks, right?
Yeah, she's recovering.
Right.
So again, we in this day and time, we think that it would be, and I'll just use this phrase, common sense.
Oh, yeah.
But as the old folks would say, common sense isn't so common these days.
Absolutely.
Yes, and so here in Nashville, I work at I'm the director of government affairs for doing healthcare work, and so we have a staff of 120, and then we see about 5,000 clients a month, and so there's a lot of traffic, and so being able to and not having mask mandates just doesn't make sense. Like I work with Vanderbilt. And I talk with the infectious disease specialist, and that's who I'm getting my recommendations from as we're preparing to open back the facilities, and and for people to not that want to play politics with it. As we're seeing people dying, I have families that have actually just recently passed away in my hometown of Farmville, Virginia.
Oh no!
They work at a prison, and they passed the disease to his parents by didn't know that he had the virus, and cooked Father's Day dinner for his father, and his mother passed yesterday morning from coronavirus.
That is amazing.
And so, so I think when it hits home, and ironically enough, I have a Republican uncle who, before this incident happened, to our family, every day he would send a message about how Democrats was just going overboard. And ironically enough, I haven't heard from him since. And normally it was a text every day. So now that it's hit home, I think unfortunately it took this for him to understand that it's not about politics, but to see his first cousin pass away, from this somebody that he grew up with, it's gotten him to change his stance.
Wow. Well, Jasper, first of all, our condolences to you and your family. But that just goes to show that this pandemic is real, and it's affecting all of us on the local level. It's just not stories we see on national news every day.
That's right. And you're right,
Absolutely.
Jasper, in terms of when it hits home, no matter what it is, when it hits home, then we begin to feel the severity of it. Then we take it more seriously. And so it's so important that we understand that.
Yes, absolutely. And unfortunately it took that. But it's until the state and the federal government get together and we take politics out of this, and unfortunate that the House does come back into session this coming week. And so I believe, from the folks that I've been talking with, and I think we're going to see some strong action coming from House Democrats, as they come back. And so I think that, we'll go, hopefully we're going to start seeing, some real leadership. But unfortunately, it's going to have to wait till Democrats come back when they convene this coming week.
Exactly. Jasper, as we move forward to progress after the protests, and we move forward with the pandemic and reopening schools, what role do you see that the Congressional Black Caucus and HBCUs can play, and also Black Lives Matter in us moving forward?
Well, fortunate enough, with Democrats in control, that means that we have an unprecedented number of African Americans who are now serving as chairs of committees and subcommittees. And our own Congressman Bobby Scott is chair of the House Education and Labor Committee. And so having that type of access and power, it will be key. Going forward, and also, but it's also going to take us in holding other leaders accountable, because they can't do it alone. Like, we know how Congressman Scott stands, on issues, but we're going to need to, move some of his colleagues to make sure that he has the votes that he needs, in the House, which means that we're going to have, and also the Senate, which means that people are going to have to turn out for this year's Senate race. I think, Senator Warner has been an advocate for HBCUs since before he was governor, of Virginia. I met him when he had an HBCU project doing, bridging the divide with tech jobs, and minorities with his HBCU project. And, he connected African-American students, from Norfolk State and other institutions in Virginia to companies like Microsoft and Apple. And, and he did this, before,
wow.
He was senator, before he was governor, and so, having allies like that at the seat of the table, it's key, has been key, and so you're going to have to turn out the vote. And so movements like Black Lives Matter, you're going to have to, turn out the vote, and you're going to have to vote for, people who are going to be the best, have your best interest at heart and at hand when they go to Washington or go to Richmond. And so, but I think there's going to be some conversations. I don't want people to get sidetracked by saying, oh, Joe Biden isn't the best. He's not the best. And so to have that conversation was before everybody else dropped out.
Right.
And so, now, this is, we have these choices. And, we're going to have to turn people out. We're going to have to turn these protests into, going to the polls. Right. And turning our vote, and then holding elected officials accountable, having town hall meetings. I hosted a town hall meeting with 600 people as our congressman, and, the other people running for office, that's running for the nomination on Wednesday. The week before, I did one with our Senate. People are looking for information. So I encourage you guys, at Norfolk State, to look into that, and engaging people online. If people are at home, we need to let people know who's out there and how they stand on our issues.
I think that's important.
More people will vote if they knew who to vote for.
Absolutely.
And they knew a little bit more, and they had more information.
Jasper, you mentioned earlier in our conversation about the Black Leadership Forum. Has anything or organization, and then of course we're talking about Black Lives Matters and other organizations. Has something replaced that? You said at one point we had this every week or month or so forth. Has something replaced that is beginning to bring different organizations together?
No, not as of yet. Like, there's been some conversations, and I've been on some Zoom calls with some people who were involved back then, and so we're trying to see. But like I said, I was trying to get out of this. My mindset was I was retired from politics.
Little did you know you weren't, right?
Yeah. So, but there's some talk, about it, and so we'll see, about the coming days, because there is a need for it.
Right. Exactly. And it's so much just what Eric said, that protest into progress is so important.
Exactly. Now, Jasper, we want you to look into your crystal ball and let us know, what are your thoughts on the upcoming election, Biden versus Trump, and all the congressional races that we should be taking a look at, and senatorial races?
Well, so I don't want people to be fooled by the polls, and I know that Norfolk State has been really great when it comes to political involvement. Dr. Elsie Barnes there, phenomenal Dr. Barnes. One of my professors there, and Dr. Wilson. And one of the things I've learned, from them was that, early on, is that polls don't vote. And so I want people to understand, and people need to really understand, that polls do not vote. And so the only poll that matters is on election day. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I said people need to go out and vote. We're in an unprecedented time. We've never seen this before. And so it's really hard for anybody to really say that they can call it, because you don't know what turnout is going to be like. You don't know if we're going to hit a spike and it's going to be 100,000 people, is reported. And then all of a sudden they say, everybody got to stay in their house. And it's on election day. What are you going to do? And so I want people to really go out and vote. And so, I think that the election, I think our next president will be Joe Biden, because I think even some Republicans have had enough. Now, whether or not they're actually going to vote for Joe Biden will be, we'll see. But I think that enough of them will probably not vote. And, maybe more Democrats will actually come out and vote this time. And we'll see that victory. Now, in Virginia, you have an interesting congressional race. My home congressional race is Virginia 5. And that goes from Centerville, outside of D.C., all the way down to Danville. Mm-hmm. And you have Dr. Cameron Webb, who is an African-American, doctor over at UVA hospital systems. He worked in the Obama White House doing health policy. Very bright, very capable young man. We need a doctor in the House.
Yes.
And he will be the first and only African-American, doctor, physician to serve in the U.S. House of Representatives.
Jasper, I think that'll be phenomenal. Now, we're coming to the end. I hate to cut you off, but we have 30 seconds, and I want us to reflect very quickly on the legacy of Representative John Lewis, who just recently passed away. Truly a giant.
Yes, and his work is not done yet, and the best way that we can honor his legacy is to continue his work. I've had the fortunate enough to work with him, over the years on several key pieces of legislation and on certain initiatives. But like I said, the best way to continue his legacy is to keep his work going and keep fighting for voting rights, which they've been sitting on for the last 2 years.
Jasper Hendricks, government relations professional, former congressional staffer, former chief of staff for the Virginia House of Delegates, political analyst, and NSU alum. Thank you so much for joining us for State of the Water.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Behold.
The green and gold.
I tell you, that's amazing. And I love that you asked him about the representative and so forth, because that matters, John Lewis. It matters very much.
It does. And it shows us that we can live a life, a fulfilled life, giving back to others and living selflessly as opposed to selfishly.
That's right. And leaving that legacy, and he left that.
He did. And our work is to carry that legacy on.
Absolutely. So thank you for being with us today. It is so fantastic when you join us and we begin to give you things to think about. So we are here every Sunday, State of the Water, 1:30 to 2 o'clock. And we also can be found on social media. Don't forget that we are on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Hot 91 Online. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll see you next week.